Alright, so I know it's pretty trite and unoriginal to start a conversation about a year in video games by stating that it was a pretty good year, or a mediocre one, as it's usually one or the other. But it's hard to deny that 2017 was a genuinely great year when it came to games, as opposed to the shitstorm that the year has been for YouTube, the internet, and pretty much every other form of media out there. Every month there was at least one or two releases that constituted a Game of the Year nomination, to the point that it felt almost impossible to stay up to date on all the new releases, never mind all the cool indie titles that came out as well. Plus, Nintendo released a home console that they actually supported, rather than sending it out to die with very little support or marketing. VR is slowly becoming more credible as a platform, and aside from MVC Infinite, Capcom seems to be slowly pulling themselves out of the trash with some really good releases and announcements. But where's the DMC5 trailer, Capcom? We know you have it, so where is it? Though, just in case you thought developers had figured out how to make good games, Sega was there for us this year with Sonic Forces to remind us that we can never be too optimistic.
Fine. I will teach you fear, then pain.
But with 2017 finally coming to its grand close, we of course now have to pit all the games from this year against each other in a huge Hell in the Cell battle royale in order to arbitrarily decide which is the best based on personal preferences. So I'm going to go through the year to look at the most noteworthy releases and events from the last 12 months and give out awards to the ones that I think are the most deserving. However, rather than cover all the awards that were covered in things like the VGAs, I'm going to be doing something a bit different and do the awards that they were too cowardly to do. That's right, Keely. I'm calling you out. At me. I dare you. Seriously though, good job on making a fairly credible game show this year. It was actually pretty good. Anyway, with all that said, let's get started with the first, and most likely last, annual Foxy Awards. Patent pending. Now let's get started with one of the most important awards. The game I spent more time thinking about than actually playing this year. Now that games as a whole have progressed more and more past the run around and shoot things phase and into the make things that are more thought-provoking phase, we should look at the games that keep you thinking about them long after you get to the credits. And yes, I'm 100% aware of how pretentious that sounds. Doki Doki Literature Club kind of came out of nowhere at the end of the year with its psychological take on visual novels, which can be disturbing at parts, but aside from the unsettling turns it takes and the absurd commentary on dating sims, it's actually an extremely well-written visual novel that gets you to care for each member of the titular literature club and makes you really consider your choices about who to spend time with. Except for Natsuki, who is trash. Persona 5, on the other hand, while it can be a bit on the nose with its themes and messages of Marxist rebellion and oppression, has a really fun story that looks at the dark parts of society that can cause corruption in higher positions of power. Though I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think the story dragged a bit in certain parts. But when it comes down to it, this award has to go to Yoko Taro and Platinum Games' joint venture, Nier Automata. Of all the big releases this year, Automata is easily one of the most interesting, especially considering it's Taro's first major AAA title. Nier Automatic Tomatoes wasn't his first game, but it was the first one that got as much push as it did. And seeing something like this getting major praise and acclaim is somewhat unprecedented, even if the only recognition it got at the recent Game Awards was for its music. While the game is fun to play, with a lighter version of the Platinum character action style, the thing that makes Nier Automata stand out from a lot of the releases this year is that it is full of Yoko Taro's signature weird game design choices that are meant to make you think about the story or even games as a whole. Throughout their proxy war against the machines, the stories of 2B, 9S, and A2 are full of philosophical themes of existential dread and questions of what it means to be. From the characters finding out the true meaning of the war they've been fighting for so long, to machines self-destructing after fulfilling their purpose. I know, fun, right? Though, while the game might make you start to question your own existence, the ultimate ending of the game is something I can only describe as positive existentialism. Because in the end, it's very optimistic about our ultimate futility in life, and how we need to find our own meaning, which somehow makes Nier Automata one of the most uplifting games of this year despite its bleak subject matter. Then there are the little details, like how the machines you fight throughout the game are almost laughably weak, to the point that you have to start to wonder why they are seen as such a threat, and why you even need to fight them in the first place. Which is something I think Yoko Taro intentionally did, since his writing tends to question pointless violence in video games. And without going into the spoilers of it, for those of you who haven't finished it, and you know who you are, I've never had such an oddly cathartic experience from a game's credit sequence. And after you finish the game proper, you're left with a lot of questions to ponder about. What is the nature of humanity? Will we be forced to repeat these events again? And most importantly, if 2B is an android, why does she need a perfectly modeled butt? So if you haven't played Nier Automata yet, you seriously need to consider fixing that, as it was the most thought-provoking game of 2017.
Do not feel bad about it. We are alive, after all. And being alive is pretty much a constant stream of embarrassment.
Moving on, next we have the Dark Souls of the Year award. Now this might sound like it's for the best Souls-like game this year, like The Surge or Dead Cells, but it's actually for the games that were needlessly compared to the Souls series in order to establish its level of difficulty, even if it doesn't have any of the same mechanics or tone or general gameplay style of the Souls games.
But at the end of the day, I think we've kind of made the Dark Souls of competitive first-person shooters. Like, in our matchmaking required a lot of tuning, because in the first alpha was almost.
And after years of the Dark Souls comparisons for any game that didn't choose to hold your hand, we finally hit the critical breaking point of it this year with Cuphead.
A great slam and then some. Now go!
Aside from the painstakingly made homage to the 30s Fleischer Brothers animations, the one thing people knew about Cuphead was that it was difficult, which likely scared a lot of people off. The game requires you to be able to notice patterns and ways that bosses throw out attacks very quickly, which can prove to be challenging due to how aggressive and fast some of those attacks can come. Plus, there's the fact you only get 3 hits before you're dead with no way to heal. It was due to this difficulty that the game was regularly compared to the Souls games, pretty much to the point of parody. The thing is, people seem to have forgotten that shoot-'em-up side-scrollers were always hard. Contra and Mega Man aren't titles that are seen as easy, and then you put in a Street Fighter 3 parry system and make every enemy a boss? Yeah, that's gonna be challenging to say the least. But is it Dark Souls? Not really. Not any more than you could say Mega Man is like Dark Souls. The Souls games are methodical and actually allows you to heal after making mistakes. Cuphead is more about pixel-perfect timing and learning boss patterns in 1-minute bursts until you get them down pat. The only thing I can really say that Dark Souls and Cuphead have in common is the focus on getting the player to see what they're doing wrong, and for them to get better with each attempt. But that's just good game design, not something exclusive to any one series. Hopefully this award won't be coming back next year, and we learn a better way to explain rewarding difficulty in games. And now we come to one of the more controversial awards, one that I know is going to cause a lot of anger, and that's the Waifu of the Year award. This award is for the female character with the best design, character arc, and overall personality. Basically, the character that is most fitting of the title waifu. And admittedly, this was a very close race this year, since there was a lot of best girls in 2017. For the early part of the year, Nintendo led the way with characters like Twintella from ARMS and Urbosa from Breath of the Wild. Danganronpa V3 and Persona 5 also had many solid female characters in either of their huge ensemble casts, with Futaba and Kaede being particular standouts. Then there are the girls from Doki Doki Literature Club, who were all memorable in their own way. And of course, there was everyone's favorite androids, 2B and A2 from Nier Automata, who were some of the most cosplayed characters this year, for obvious reasons. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to give Titania from Evil Within 2 an honorable mention here as well.
You deserve a round of applause for that. I'm sure there's someone out there that will provide that for you.
But while there was some strong competition, and this will be a controversial decision, the waifu of 2017 had to go to this year's dark horse, Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. Now, before you pull out your pitchforks, let me present my reasoning on this. At the start of the game, it feels like Aloy's story is going to be that of your average coming-of-age Disney protagonist. Born under unusual circumstances, an outcast that needs to prove herself to the village, someone who's bullied for being different from everybody else, but we the audience know she's actually a sweetheart. When the training montage starts in the first hour, I was actually expecting a musical number to kick in. But after her hunter's exam is interrupted and the actual plot reveals its monstrous, huge open world head, Aloy has to go on a journey to figure out who she is, and how that might influence the world as a whole. Mostly by fighting giant robot dinosaurs. Aloy's adventure isn't a grimdark need to save her family or to be a hero and save the world from destruction. It's a journey of self-discovery that just happens to be directly tied to what's happening in the world. She does have similarities to the new Lara Croft due to her being a youngish girl who uses a bow, but she also stands out as her own person as well. Namely, when her teenage attitude pops up in conversations.
I did say not to break anything, didn't I?
Some of her best moments aren't even during the big hero scenes, but in the little interactions she has with other characters.
These little moments are refreshing, aren't they?
That could be the least creepy thing you've said to me.
And there's the fact that Aloy being a girl is never a major focus in the story. She isn't proving herself because she needs to be respected like all the boys, or has to show that she's just as strong. Aloy is simply doing her thing just like everybody else. She is a strong character in her own right, and her 2 X chromosomes never have to distract from that. So, Aloy gets this award not simply because she has the cutest design / outfit, or fits a particular personality type, but because she has the best writing and arc when compared to all the other female characters this year. And I'm totally not biased because I like redheads. Oh, and for those of you asking for the husbando of the year, there isn't really a competition. It's Sir Gilman from Pyre, obviously. Anyway, speaking of controversies, it wouldn't be a year in review for gaming without looking at the multiple controversies that happened over the last 12 months, which is what the award for PR Disaster of the Year is for. To start, there was the botched release of the Friday the 13th game, where the developers didn't have enough servers at launch, meaning no one could play the game. And then the developers getting death threats over how they banned a player. There was also famous emotions expert David Cage showing his self-esteem issues about being a games director when arguing with an interviewer that they wouldn't be asking a film writer and director about the questionable content of their work, like child and domestic abuse, despite that being what an interviewer is supposed to do. Jim Sterling showed how dangerous it can be to anger Nintendo fans when he got DDoS'd for giving Breath of the Wild an abysmal 7 out of 10. Though while there was some smaller controversies here and there, everyone knows that this one will have to go to EA. Not one particular thing they did, just EA as a whole. I know publishers fuck up sometimes, like Pokemon Go Fest having massive server problems during a huge public event.
The biggest, mob is almost 1/4 this size.
And Atlas threatening to take down any YouTubers and streamers that showed anything past July 7th in Persona 5, but no one has been as consistent as EA has been this year, with almost every news story that had to do with EA ending with people screaming. First, the year started off with a rushed-out Mass Effect Andromeda that was full of GIF-worthy glitches and wonky animations, but lacked the quality and depth that made the Mass Effect series so beloved in the first place. And of course, after Andromeda did predictably poorly, the series was put on hiatus, and the studio that developed it were turned into a support studio seemingly as punishment. Then EA shut down Visceral Games, the studio who developed the Dead Space series, until EA drove it into the ground with microtransactions and DLC. Noticing a trend here? And what made this sting worse was that Visceral had been working on a big Uncharted-style Star Wars game, written by Uncharted writer and director Amy Hennig, for multiple years at this point. But supposedly EA didn't like where it was going, thinking gamers didn't want a single-player Star Wars experience and would rather have games as a service. Despite the fact that KOTOR 1 and 2 are the most beloved games in the franchise, and you have the studio that created the series sitting right there. And not long after killing off a studio, EA then announced that they had purchased their latest developer, Respawn Studios, the people known for developing the Titanfall franchise. So look forward to seeing them get shut down in a couple years. But easily the biggest controversy that EA was involved in this year was with the Battlefront 2 loot boxes. Now, Jim Sterling has covered this whole thing 8 Ways to Sunday, but if you need a refresher, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was released with a somewhat egregious loot box system for the multiplayer that tainted many people's enjoyment of the actual game, resulting in EA putting out a few responses that didn't exactly ease the problem, creating even more backlash. And the EA PR team has been having a busy couple months doing cleanup since then in order to recoup the lost sales of the game due to boycotts. Actually, I think we have a clip of them at their offices when this was all going down.
Everything's on fire! Oh my god!
In fact, this controversy was so big that nations like Belgium and Australia have started to look into the legality of loot boxes as a whole to see if they should be considered gambling. When you mess up so bad that international law is coming in to investigate you and your entire industry, maybe you should take a look at what you're doing. So, good job, EA. Maybe in 2018 you can try not to be the worst thing ever.
The Empire's time has come.
Now, like any proper awards show, we need to take a moment to have a memoriam for those who are no longer with us. And in 2017, we had a very significant loss that shook the entire industry to its very core. And that was the death of the Nintendo Wii U. With the announcement of the Switch, the marketing and financial failure that was the Nintendo's Wii U was finally put to rest. From pretty much day one, Nintendo didn't really know what to do with this console. It clearly had Nintendo's focus on simple and clean fun when it first came out, but it had trouble conveying what it was supposed to be to the general public. Is it a dedicated home console? Is it a portable handheld with a tablet controller? Is it supposed to be an extension of the Wii U like the Kinect, or is it something entirely separate? Is it for family games? Is it for the hardcore market? I don't know. And it was this confusion on what the Wii U was that caused very few people to end up buying it, resulting in third-party developers not even wanting to make games for the thing. But while the Wii U didn't affect a lot of people's lives, which may have been the problem in the first place, it did have a lot of great exclusives on it, like, Bayonetta 2's getting a port, so Wonderful 1 was pretty cool. Smash Bros. 4, I guess, works. Well, fortunately, Breath of the Wild also made it onto the Wii U this year as its final big release, so at least those unfortunate souls that actually owned this forsaken console got one last morsel from Nintendo before they took it out back and put it out of its misery. Rest in peace, Wii U. You and your poorly designed tablet controller will be missed. Anyway, moving on. In a year where we had major titles like a huge open world Zelda, a new Persona, Nier Automata, Cuphead, Mario Odyssey, and Horizon Zero Dawn, there are inevitably games that would fall by the wayside, especially the indie releases that don't have the same level of marketing as the bigger titles. And that's why the Game You Didn't Play This Year and Should Feel Bad About award is here for them. The kickstarted Battle Chasers Night War brings back Joe Mad's late 90s comic book series with a fun and well-animated dungeon crawler RPG that's stylized to look much like the comic book series that it's based off of. And if you don't appreciate how 90s this game really is, just look at some of these character designs. On the flip side, Night in the Woods, while light on the gameplay aspect of a video game, makes up for it with clever writing and likable characters, where you play as a college dropout going back to her hometown. Okay, it's better than it sounds, trust me. And then there's the Sexy Brutale, which effectively adds Majora's Mask time loop mechanics to a murder mystery show that makes for a unique puzzle/investigation game. Regardless, the winner of this award has to go to Supergiant Games' Pyre. In Pyre, you're living in a world that is a cross between Fahrenheit 451 and Space Jam, in that reading is forbidden, and those that have been exiled from civilization are meant to compete in 3v3 sports ball competitions in order to cleanse their souls and gain entry back into the Commonwealth. Going with Supergiant's design theme of artistically satisfying games, Pyre is a well put together piece of art. The world and background art is extremely colorful and makes it a joy to watch your group travel around it Oregon Trail style. Plus, the score made by hipster music wizard Darren Korb adds a lot of life to the already beautiful environments, and gives some extra impact to the more emotional interactions in the game. The 3v3 matches also made me appreciate what makes sports games fun, with all your characters having unique mechanics that make them play differently from each other, meaning you have to find ways to balance out the ones you use in a pickup game. And if your ragtag group of a team has a good season, then you have a chance to free one of your companions from exile. Though this means you have to decide on if you want to send someone you like, or keep them around because they're a useful teammate. But there is a limited amount of get out of exile passes, meaning you have to choose carefully. So if you haven't played Pyre in 2017, or at least Battle Chasers, you should feel a bit bad about it. Not too bad, because I know there's a lot of games out this year, just a little bit bad.
Shame.
In any case, another common theme in AAA releases this year was making improvements on series that were starting to be seen as a bit mediocre, or were starting to lose their appeal. Assassin's Creed Origins, for one, was Ubisoft's return to the franchise after they put the series to bed for a while, due to having driven the series into the ground from continual yearly releases and a rather boring tie-in movie. And Origins actually brought quite a bit of life back into the series, though I'm still waiting for the AC game set in feudal Japan. Similarly, Destiny 2 was close to what everyone wanted Destiny 1 to be, namely having an actual campaign with a story that doesn't require you to go to a website to find it. And then there was Resident Evil 7, which was a return to form for those who loved the survival horror mechanics of the classic RE games, having more PT scariness than RE5 boulder punching this time around. But of all the series that have shown improvement this year, the one that gets the Most Improved award is Evil Within 2. Back in 2014, Evil Within showed a lot of promise when it showed up on the scene, with an Inception style of survival horror, some interesting mechanics, and it was helmed by the guy who made Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami. But the game was held down by things like obnoxious letterboxing to make it look more cinematic, one-hit kill bosses that were more frustrating than scary, and a convoluted story. Evil Within 2, on the other hand, while it can sometimes be a bit too hard, feels a lot more focused on what it wants to do, and fixes a lot of the problems found in the first game. It uses similar tropes to other horror games, like spooky, shifty level geometry, but it works with the tone that the game is going for, and it finally feels like it has its own style now that it's really leaning into the psychological aspects of the setting. Plus, the game has interesting characters with actual personalities this time around. For example, Sebastian doesn't feel as much like a gritty piece of cardboard with a vague backstory that you're dragging through missions. And occasionally we get to see a more lighthearted version of him this time around, which makes him more likable as a protagonist.
Slide projector. Where did my memory dig this up? Elementary school?
The villains and boss fights are much more unique and interesting than the previous game as well, with Stefano being one of the most memorable antagonists this year.
So sorry, but you've been outbid.
Overall, Evil Within 2 was such an improvement on the franchise that I'm genuinely excited to see where the series will go from here. Though, admittedly, there's no way to pet the cat that's in the police department office, so there are still massive improvements that can be made. Now, while we did get a lot of great releases in 2017, a year can be made of just Game of the Year winners, as there are of course going to be those that tried to be and kind of fell on their faces while doing so, which is what the Gold Star At Least You Tried award is for. This year there were a few titles that came out that either just couldn't keep up with the competition or just didn't really know what they were doing. After a rather successful Kickstarter, Yooka-Laylee came out in 2017 to a resounding, it's okay I guess, it's fun. It brought back the old school Banjo-Kazooie nostalgia, but unfortunately that might not be enough for modern gameplay sensibilities. In contrast, Shadow of War reviewed well enough when it first released, but was brought down by the modern developer need for loot boxes. Then there's the game that tried to eat Overwatch's scraps, Cliffy B's Lawbreakers, which wasn't inherently bad, but simply couldn't compete with Blizzard, even if it wasn't that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit. And of course, we can't forget about House Party.
Oh, get your penis out of my face, you freak!
Though, despite my heavy criticisms of its story mode, I actually have to give this one to Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. While the game had a rough launch that was very reminiscent of Street Fighter V's the year before, being very limited in both modes and characters, and the story mode was mostly an excuse to advertise the DLC characters, with Black Panther and Monster Hunter looking 10 times better than a majority of the roster at launch, the core gameplay of MVC Infinite is actually quite fun. Having the fast-paced 2v2 tag team battles makes for some really enjoyable matches, and the crazy combos you can pull off when you switch between characters on the fly are genuinely engaging, especially when you experiment with different team matchups. Plus, there's some fun shenanigans to be had with the Infinity Stone mechanics that were introduced, like locking up your opponent in a space box or being able to teleport around the stage. If Capcom hadn't made this game on the cheap, there honestly could have been a really strong scene for this game, since Marvel vs. Capcom has always had a presence in the FGC, and everyone loves a good crossover game. Capcom did try to salvage the general disinterest the game had earned by setting up a fun gimmick for its Infinite tournaments, where competitors could win Infinity Stones that let them do crazy BS in later events, but the damage had already been done to the brand. It's just too bad that Capcom decided to rush this game out, because MVC was a series that I remember loving when I was a kid, and we haven't had a hype tag team fighting game in a while, so it's a bit disheartening to see it as a shell of its former self. I do hope that the game gradually corrects itself like Street Fighter V has, but considering Dragon Ball FighterZ is coming out soon, I doubt anyone will care if it does. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of this whole shit show, so I'm gonna do some rapid fire words to get more out there. Best launch title, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Seriously, I don't think the Switch's launch would have been successful if it didn't have such a huge game come out with it. Dankest meme, Persona 5. Scared the most shit out of me, Doki Doki Literature Club. Fan-made game that was better than the official release, Sonic Mania. Best excuse for a VR system, Resident Evil 7 VR. Coolest crossover, Hellboy and Injustice 2. Weirdest crossover, Rabbids in the Mario universe. Seriously, who asked for this? And game I'm gonna get in the most trouble for not giving any time to, Super Mario Odyssey. Finally, now that 2017 has come to a close, we need to look towards the future, so the final award is actually for the most anticipated game of 2018, otherwise known as the Get Hyped Award. Detroit Become Human is something I'm personally looking forward to, but that's partially to see how heavy-handed David Cage will be with the racism allegory that's alluded to in the trailers. Dragon Ball FighterZ is coming really soon too, and I can't wait to get my hands on it, since it has all the love and care that ArcSys is known for putting into their fighting games, crossed with the nostalgia of the Dragon Ball Z series. Hopefully, now that we know that they're including super characters into the game, we will see my sweet anime daughter Caulifla be included in the roster, even if it's as DLC. Persona 5 is getting its own dancing rhythm game as well, which has a lot of potential since the original game had so much style to it already. Then there's whatever the hell Kojima's Death Stranding is. Over all the interesting looking releases planned for 2018 though, the one I'm most anticipating is one that I've been waiting literal years for, Kingdom Hearts 3. Yes, much like any fan that has played the Kingdom Hearts games on the PS2 back in the day, I've been waiting for the next major installment to the series for more than a decade, and we might finally see it in 2018, assuming there isn't any more major delays. We've already seen some of the worlds and battle systems that will be in the third game, and they look great. Plus, now that Fox is owned by the Disney dynasty, we might get even more crazy worlds in there. And with this title, we will also finally see the conclusion of Sora's storyline in the Kingdom Hearts universe, which has spanned multiple consoles and generations over the years. Now, let's just hope that the game lives up to the hype that's been built up over the last decade. Anyway, that about does it for this award show. Overall, 2017 has been such a crazy year for games. Nintendo released a new console to critical acclaim, there were games that pushed the medium, even if by a little, we may have seen the death of the loot box, and we got a plethora of new waifus. I mean, it's hard to complain about a year like that, and that's not even mentioning the sheer amount of great releases we had. I was certain at the end of 2016 that Persona 5 was going to be my game of 2017 hands down, and now I can't even say with certainty that it's in my top 3. That isn't to say I didn't love it, it's just that there's so many top tier titles this year that it's hard to pinpoint an exact winner without feeling like I'm ignoring another. In fact, despite the length of this video, it was genuinely impossible to give even a passing glance to every notable release this year. So hey, if there's any awards or games you think I missed, let me know in the comments. I'm sure there's going to be someone asking where Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey were in this, despite them already dominating most award shows and top 10 lists. But anyway, I think that about wraps it up for 2017, and I want to end this whole thing by saying how much I've enjoyed this year on YouTube. Seeing my tiny Babby channel at the very start of the year slowly grow to the size it is now was awesome. And while I haven't grown that much in the grand scheme of things and have a ways to go, I still super appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch my stuff and leave supportive and constructive comments. It's thanks to you guys that I had such an amazing year in 2017, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what 2018 will bring. Oh, and for those of you waiting for a continuation on the DMC series retrospectives, expect to see something quite soon. So, I hope you all have a happy holidays, an awesome New Year's, and I'll see you next time.